Well, I would like to thank everybody for joining us today for our Jewish Family Service Food for Thought program. If you have any questions during the program, feel free to write them in the chat. We'll have Q&As at the end. I would like to invite Jamie Richmond to introduce Marlene in today's event.
Thank you, Sunny. So 2 years ago, Adam sent me an email with the subject, "You and Stephen should definitely do this," with a link to the March of the Living trip for young adults from small Jewish communities. March of the Living had been on my bucket list since I heard about it over 15 years ago, but it had never been a possibility because of the cost. The actual cost is about $7,700. This highly subsidized trip was something I could actually consider. Adam and I immediately started talking about how to get the word out and how we could get a group from Savannah to go. The Dina Yaztak-Bodzner Memorial Fund was our answer. Dina Bodzner set up the fund to be used, quote, "to perpetuate the memory of the Holocaust and the Jewish survival through education." And the fund agreement further identified specific programs of interest to Dina Bodzner as being the March at the Living program. We went to Richard, Brenda, and Michael, Dina's children, and presented them with the idea of further subsidizing the trip with another $1,000 each. Without hesitation, they were in. This is exactly what their mother would have wanted. I immediately signed myself up without telling my husband, and the interest spread and we became a group of 14. My husband finally came around and was number 14 to register. In late April, we set out for Poland, the 14 of us not sure what adjective to use to explain our emotions. We were excited to have this experience, ready to learn, and all of us feeling a sense of obligation to visit these places that we had heard so much about. Each of us can tell you different stories about what made the most impact, but all of us came away with something special. Our educator reminded us over and over again that although it was 6 million Jews that perished in the Holocaust, it is our obligation to make sure that it is not history. It is his story and her story, and it is our job to tell their stories. Those 6 million were made up of 6 million individual stories. While we were on the trip, we all thought about how to take this experience that was so meaningful and moving for all of us and bring it back to this community. Marlene Seidman-Robinowich captured our journey through photographs. I am honored to introduce her to you to share her incredible artwork. Marlene is Assistant Professor of Fine Arts at Savannah State University, a very talented photographer, mother to 2 very rambunctious boys, and a great friend of mine. Welcome, Marlene.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen so that I can get started. I like to start any talk about photography with this picture that was taken a few decades ago. This is me over here floating in space. And I like to start with this picture whenever I talk about photographs, because you might notice that everyone looks very happy and I am by myself. And if you look very closely, there is a little halo around me because I refuse to be in any of the photos that were taken. This is my aunt and uncle's wedding. And so the photographer had to, this is back when there were negatives and film, cut from the negative my picture of me sitting at a table and then add it to the photograph and reprint them. So there's only one copy of this photograph. And it is the beginning of my photography career when I refused to be in any of the pictures. And so then I thought to myself, how do you do that best? You begin behind the camera and you take pictures of other people. So that is the beginning of my photography career. Instead of being in the photographs, taking the photographs. So I titled the exhibition, We Remember. It had a different title originally, but as I kind of sat with it over the last 2 years, I really thought that was important because not only was it the subject matter, obviously remembering and telling the stories, as Jamie said, but also me and the other delegates remembering our trip. So here are some of the photographs. And I want to invite some of the other people who are on here to help me kind of tell the stories. For example, like what were your expectations, and be thinking about that. I'm going to call on you. And how did it change you, right? How did this experience change the way you thought about Yom HaShoah and presenting it? How did it change your perspective of the Holocaust? How did it change your perspective of being in the Jewish community? Things like that were all things that we knew we were going to have to talk about. And luckily, I knew I was going to get to do it in photographs. Jamie had started the conversation. She sent me the email that said, you should go on this trip. And I wrote back to her, are you doing this? And she wrote back to me, I already signed up. You should go on this trip. And then I said, okay, I think I'm going to go. And then we talked immediately about doing an exhibition for the month of April the following year. And then, of course, COVID. And so it got pushed back, which I actually think maybe was okay, because it gave us time to kind of sit with these images. This is just a little bit about March of the Living, which Jamie talked about, bringing people together to have this experience. And part of what was special about our trip was that it allowed a group of people who were kind of in between the age brackets, right? Normally it's high school students and usually kind of retirees to experience this trip. And I think almost all of us, maybe all but one, of the people from the Savannah community had small children at the time. And so I think that also helped to bond us. And so here are some of the images from our trip. The image on the left is us going into Auschwitz. And then the image on the right is us going into Birkenau. And we were carrying with us these signs. You can see Liebe Finn on the one side. And so we all were given information about somebody whose name was similar to ours, which I was not expecting. And do you guys want to talk about that? Does anybody? I can't see who's on there, but Jamie, Orly, Shelly, Seth, you're in this too now.
So I can share. It's interesting because mine is the one that has like a bunch of names and then Dolberg, which was actual family of my husband's and my own. And the name on the top, they tried to give me something close to Orly, I guess. And it was another person who was, what they didn't know was from Romania. That's where my family was from. This woman was 34 years old. I was 37 when I went on the trip. And so they gave me somebody random who, when you think about, yes, it was 6 million people, but like Jamie said, it was 6 million individuals. It hit really close to home. And so it puts you in that mentality of the whole thing. What were they feeling? What was their day like? Because our days there were beautiful and sunny and like in color, which is not how I learned about the Holocaust. I learned about it in black and white pictures. And there's almost this guilt of I very well could have been this person 70 years ago. And their experience here was much different. And so it made it very real. And also very, very personal and very heavy the entire trip, knowing I'm walking into all these places they walked in on, and that responsibility and guilt that I know I'm leaving. And I held that with me, like in every place we went, especially like when we went into the gas chambers, that guilt and responsibility hand in hand of knowing I get to walk out. And what does that mean for my future and for future futures? So.
Thank you. And that was kind of part of the importance for me, was taking these pictures in color. because I had also had that experience that the only images I had ever seen or really learned about were in black and white. They felt really serious, and they felt, which they are, but they felt intentionally historic, right? When we think about black and white images, we think about them being in the past. And that is also why I felt like it was really important to have images in color. And the spaces there were so beautiful. And the colors so vibrant, and the sky was clear and white puffy clouds. And I think that was what unexpected for me also. That if these buildings had not been there, if the education that went along with our tour had not been there, these fields would have gone back to what they were beforehand, and it could have very easily been erased from history. And I think having color photographs where you can see both the beauty of the land and the horror of what was done there at the same time was really important. These are some of the images. We went around Poland also. We saw, this is from the interior of a synagogue, and kind of different spaces. And then this is in a cemetery. And this is actually, I think this is Morgan McGee's arm. And this sort of ability of people to not necessarily cover up, but to take the pieces and make something whole again. I think that's what really struck me about this location, and this cemetery, that these are the pieces of headstones that were broken and destroyed, and they've been put back together, so that people have a place to go, have a place for their ancestors' headstones to be, not, on the ground. And I think that was a really kind of important moment, especially because we kind of started here on our trip. This is in Krakow, and then we kind of ended our trip in Jerusalem at the Wailing Wall, which obviously, when you look at it, there are similarities there. And so I thought that was really well designed on the part of the March of the Living, right? To kind of take you into this space visually, and then end in this space visually. Like, as a visual artist, I really appreciated that kind of connection, of rebuilding, of history, of something that was once maybe broken, or whole, then broken, and then whole again. And that cycle. Here's the rest of that cemetery. You can see on the back wall, there's some more of those headstones and pieces put together. And then here's some more images of our group. This is Rabbi Fred Gutman. He was our leader, our tour guide, and he came out of retirement of his March of the Living guide days to do this trip with this group. Like I said, it was kind of an experiment to have us in this in-between age bracket. And I think he had a very good time. I don't want to speak for him, but I think he really enjoyed being with us. And we enjoyed being with him. I think he got to relive his 20s and 30s. Here is beautiful Orly. But I think I had never seen pictures in color like this, and never seen people experiencing places, right? I had really just seen images of buildings, images of the ground, images insides of buildings, but never people, and what it would be like. Shelley, do you want to talk about this? Anybody?
about that picture?
Yeah. Do you remember? Shelly and
Yeah.
I came upon this group, the picture of the left, because we had lingered a little bit longer behind.
Yes. So yeah. So as we were both snapping all of the pictures, I remember coming up and we saw this hill, and I think I missed the beginning of what the rabbi was talking about, and everybody, and I'm busy taking pictures of daisies and flowers in face of all of this destruction and all these things. And so I kind of rushed myself into following with my group, and all of a sudden I'm walking into the building behind, which is the gas chamber, and realizing, as we start to collect ourselves in there, that I just walked mindlessly into this location that like everybody else would have desperately have been trying to get out of or not walking into, right? Like I was desperate to catch up with my group and be like with everybody, and I just kind of ended up and like walked through a small little room and then into this big gas chamber and stood there next to the wall. And that's the first time I ever said Kaddish, because both of my parents are still alive. So I wouldn't, and I had a long discussion with the rabbis before I left about saying Kaddish, and the first time I ever said Kaddish was inside of the gas chamber.
I think that moment for us was, the rabbi was really good about kind of stopping and letting us pause after moments like that, to really talk about it. And I think that was also what was different about this trip for me, because I had gone previously to Dachau when I was doing a study abroad, and I was by myself. I mean, I was with a group of tourists, but going with the March of the Living group, I mean, especially I went with my husband, Philip. So at the end of the day, I had somebody to talk to. And when we came back home, we had people to talk to that had a similar experience. And so I think it really helped with processing it. And the rabbi was very good about like taking these moments to like stop. Let's talk about what we just saw, or he would like tell us a story about, something that had happened or something that came later. And so we could take kind of a break from what we were seeing to reflect on our own thoughts. And so I sort of did a combination. Here's inside. And what was happening, kind of these more traditional images, right? And then on the right is an image by Morgan McGee. And I don't think she's on here, but she said that this image was really important to her because of the kind of the light that was coming in. She talked a lot about the light and how, which as a photographer, it's all about the light and the lack of light, how there's nothing here, but she knows the story, right? And so you have to know the story in order to fill in the gaps, that it's otherwise a table, but if you know the story, it's a table where people were tortured and experimented on, and people died. And yet it's this table where light was kind of shining through the window. And you would never know, what it was if you didn't know the story, which is why education and going to places like this is so important. And telling the story over and over is so important. And sharing the images is so important. So I have some that are black and white, more traditional. But again, that importance of the color. Here's another one. Sort of the insides of buildings, and there's some more of Birkenau as we were kind of leaving. And like Orly said, it was just, the sky was blue, there were white clouds. And I had seen, the images of train cars before. I had seen these really traditional kind of documentary style images. But it was different being there, and it was different experiencing people walking through. I remember that Shelley and I stood waiting and waiting and waiting for people to pass by so we could get the train car without all of the March of the Living participants, because there were thousands and thousands of people that you don't see to the left and the right. So we could kind of get that image, and we were waiting and waiting and waiting for it to happen. And so I think there's something about that too, that I knew going into it, or we knew going into it, that we were going to use these images later. So I wanted to make sure that I had both with people, without people, documenting the spaces. There's another one. And then here are some with the people. So I have some that, you know, are the traditional. And then here is us marching, actually walking from Auschwitz to Birkenau. And this is kind of us reaching the gate, the main gate, which is pretty iconic. There's Jamie and Philip and Robin and Tova. And
you.
And me. This is the one picture I'm in. Thank you, Shelley. So these moments of, like, you can see there's kind of a sea of people. It was really overwhelming, because also when you see images, I think, of these concentration camps, death camps, it looks like nobody is there, right? It looks haunting. And yet here we were, like, thousands of Jewish people together in this location. And we were walking out, right? And then walking in, and then we were going to walk out again. And I think people have said that those moments, and we were all there together, you know, wrapped in Israeli flags and singing. And there were people on the streets who were not participating in the walk or in the March of the Living, but who were there with signs, Polish people. There was a Korean group that had signs like, "We love you, we support you," standing on the roadside. And that, I'm not even sure I have the words still 2 years later to explain that. And then we went to Auschwitz, we went to Birkenau, we did the march. And then, but before that, we went to different camps. This is Majdanek, which I had never heard of before I went on this trip. I had heard of Auschwitz and Birkenau. I had heard of Dachau. I had heard of some of the places, but I had never heard of Majdanek. And that was also overwhelming, right? You're like, I'm a Jewish kid. I grew up Jewish. My whole family's Jewish. I learned about the Holocaust in school. And yet there were places I'd never even heard of. And this, the scene to the right is March of the Living. You can see the blue jackets standing over top of ditches where 18,000 people were killed in one day. It was after the revolt in Sobibor, correct me if I'm wrong, Shelley. And it was overwhelming to stand there. And then behind, you can see I'm standing for the center picture, like this is that same edge as the image in the middle. And this is another one of those photos that came from, you know, lagging behind a little bit to take pictures. I turned around and I saw this, what I assume is an Orthodox man just standing up at this dome, which was created to house the ashes that were found when the camp was liberated. It goes about 3 stories down, I believe, and it's a mound of ashes that they found that were left there. And you can tell by the size of him in relationship to the dome, and you can tell in relationship it overlooks this field where so many people were killed. The scale of it is something, I think, that we say 6 million people and 6 million Jews, and it's a big number, but I think when you're standing there looking at fields of people's remains, it's something beyond a number. It's something beyond like comprehensible. And then on the right is Morgan's picture. And I think a lot of us, Lauren and Shelly, myself, Jamie, took these pictures of these so many dandelions, like so many dandelions in these really green fields. And dandelions are this like flower, like it's a weed, right? To so many people, and it just grows, and it has no choice, right? Like dandelions come up no matter how much you put weed killer on them, they just keep surviving. And I just thought like that metaphor of the dandelion, like so bright and so beautiful and just thriving in these fields no matter what, was just really, sat with all of us. And we all took these pictures and then we talked about it later. We weren't, talking about the pictures like, oh, I'm going to get that one too. Right? Like we were all taking these pictures and then talked about it after. I took that same picture. I had that same feeling. And I think that's really important. These are also Maidanic. And the thing that struck me, which, like I said, I had never heard of Maidanic, about it is that this is the city of Lublin right behind it, directly behind it. These are the buildings in the camp, in the extermination camp, and these are the buildings behind. And while some of them are new, the city was there. And so in these sort of photos, which is, I guess, on the left, what I had seen, right, you can't tell that there's a city there at all. And so I thought it was really important to show, like, there were people living there. There was a city going on around it. It was not removed from society. It wasn't hidden. It was there. And then coming up next, it isn't even clear, kind of, is this larger image. And if you look closely, I think several of us took this same picture. And if you look closely in the center, you'll see a little building. Now, what you can't see is that there is a fence, barbed wire fence right here, where my mouse is. And that was the barbed wire fence that was separating Maidanic from their neighbor behind them. And we asked the rabbi about it, and we asked the rabbi about that building, which was clearly not new. And he said, yeah, people's houses were right there. And if you look really closely, there's a little garden and there is a swing set. So somebody's children play on the swing set that overlooks a concentration camp. And that hit hard, as somebody with two little kids, well, one and not at the time, that hit really hard, that your backyard borders a death camp, and life was going on the other side of a fence. And there isn't even a privacy fence, right? There's a barbed wire fence you can see right through. And this Maidanic is actually the inspiration for the boy in the striped pajamas, which I did not know at the time. And that was really striking. And then when Shelly and I hung this show, we decided to put this picture on the left, which is in between blocks 10 and 11 in Auschwitz. And it's the black wall, which is where they would take people when they were finished doing experiments in block 10, and sometimes not. And this is like a shooting wall. And so I thought that was really interesting. I didn't know it at the time, but I took these photos kind of from the exact same perspective. And I think they make sense together. I'm gonna let Shelly talk about this a little bit too. The picture on the left is Shelly Jensen's, and then the picture on the right is mine. And this is Treblinka. Do you want to talk about that? I know you were thinking about it.
In my great-grandparents' synagogue growing up, I remember there being like stained glass with the tree of life. We all know the symbolism of the tree of life. And as we're putting all of this up, and Marlene showed me that this was one of the pictures that was going to be going into the exhibition, the one on the left here. I started thinking, like, what was I trying to capture? What was I going through, trying to get myself back into my state of mind? And as we're walking through all these stones, all the stones are in commemoration of the villages, right, in Poland that have been destroyed by the Holocaust, by the Shoah. And for me, it was striking to see this tree in the middle of all of that. It's out of all of the devastation, out of everything, we still have this tree, a tree of life. We're all connected. We're a tree. The trees are strong. Trees have roots that spread out all over the place. They nourish the earth. The Jewish people are strong, just like the trees, and we just keep growing. And just the idea of like the trees in my synagogues growing up, to trees of life in songs that I sing with my kids, to a tree of life in the middle of a death camp, was where there's nothing at this camp. That's all you see is a field. You have train tracks and a field. Is quite powerful for me.
And then this was also unexpected. I guess it was all unexpected, but the rabbi, I'm not sure if this was on our original itinerary. He did that a lot. He would say, stop the bus, we have to do this. And sometimes they would listen, most of the time. And so we stopped in the middle of this forest, and he told us to all get out off the bus. And we walked down this path to just a little wooded, like cleared area with a fence around it. And he took out 6 candles and he said, we're now standing in the place where an entire town of people were brought and murdered. And he told us the story about how it happened and that they didn't know where they were going. They thought they were, being transported to someplace else. And he had each of the participants light a candle. And then as we were taking this picture, we noticed that it said the next generation, which was the name of our group. Like I said, we were that in between. So there's like the high school, young adults, and then ours was called Next Generation. And it was written on the candles. And I mean, he didn't sort of line them up or anything. He just put them out there. And it was a really kind of sobering moment to be standing there in the middle of the forest with nothing else around. And people, you can see people started sort of leaving stones behind, Israeli flags, and creating this memorial out of what was really a fenced area. Anybody else? I don't want to take away from anybody else's stories. And then we got on a plane and we flew to Israel overnight. And when we woke up in the morning and we left Poland, it was kind of cold and raining and nighttime. And everybody was a little bit cranky and sick of schnitzel, like really sick of schnitzel, which is the only food that they served us. And it was cold. So then we flew to Israel and we get there and it's like 75 degrees and a like warm breeze from the ocean. And it felt like a weight was lifted in a way for me. And we went to breakfast, and there were foods of every color and every variety and freshness. And if Philip is on this call, Philip said to me, I'm pretty sure that this is some sort of psychological experiment, because we felt bad, and then all of a sudden here's Israel with this beautiful food and this beautiful weather and this beautiful experience. And we kind of left behind for a moment to just like be happy. And when we spoke 2 years ago, when we first got back, we spoke in August, and we all kind of were talking about like, when we got there, we took, I know that I took maybe 20, 30 pictures the whole time we were in Israel, because I was busy being in Israel, and I didn't feel the weight of it. And here is a picture of Jamie and Stephen walking hand in hand. And then here is the march on Israeli Independence Day through the old city, and just the variety of people, and old, young, different races, different ethnicities, different varying, countries. And it just felt kind of like a deep breath. And here's our Savannah group. And so I was hoping, we have like a few minutes, that the other participants that are on could kind of talk about like how this experience changed you. If it changed you, I think it did, but how it changed you, if you could talk a little bit. Jamie.
How it changed me was, I think that the whole experience was powerful. I think being with a group of people from home was powerful. I think you talked about how when we got back, we had people to debrief and discuss with. To go with my husband and some of my best friends was powerful. To have this conversation almost exactly 2 years later, and still feel like we are there, and listening to you recount your experience and knowing that I had those exact same feelings at that time. I think when we got back, we thought a lot about what can we do with this experience. And in the times that have come in the last 2 years, I think it has made me think more about standing up for what I believe in, standing up for what is right. When you look at that picture of the swing set right there, what were those people thinking? It was terrible, horrible times, but what could they have done? The city right there, what could they have done differently to stand up for what is right? And so I continuously think about what I'm going to stand up for, what I think is right, and not to just be a bystander. That's what I've really taken from the experience.
Thank you. Anybody else?
So you were talking about Majdanek and the Orthodox man that was standing at the dome. And for me, that day was one of the most moving, because you picture yourself, right? They keep telling you, picture yourself as if you were here. And so you picture yourself in 21st century clothing, wearing jeans and whatever. And there was this old man in his 90s, definitely very Orthodox, with his entire family looked like the clothing could have come out of 1940s Europe, like in the Orthodox community. And he's walking through and they are surrounding him and they are singing and he's walking. And I was watching the look on his face and you can't help but wonder the resilience of this man, right? Like what he must have gone through. Somebody, like I was talking to somebody in the group like after, and he was a survivor. He had survived that exact location. And the resilience of this person, the legacy that he is now creating and the family around him that supports him, and the legacy and the resilience of the Jewish people. And right, like we've been around for thousands of years, and how do we continue on that? And what is my part in that, making sure our people are resilient and still around and supported and continuing to grow? So
Thank you. I just added some more images from Israel after that, sort of this moments of regular life and moments of history. And then these are my process. Also part of the show are cyanotypes, which are blueprints. Just going to talk for a minute. And so that resilience that Orly was talking about really inspired me to make this set of cyanotypes. It's a historic process. And I had been out of the darkroom because of COVID. Our darkroom on campus is closed because of space. We can't social distance in the darkroom. So we've moved our photo class into digital. And so I was really frustrated, not sort of having my hands in the process. And so I knew we were going to get ready for this show. And so I wanted something handmade. And so I started making these cyanotypes. And like Orly was saying, this idea of resilience, cyanotypes are made in the dark and then exposed to the light, exposed to the sunlight. And the image is reversed. And then they're washed away. The chemicals are washed away with water and made permanent. And I thought that was a really nice metaphor for this idea of kind of us having this experience of learning, relearning maybe the history, having the experience kind of stepping into this light, right? And then using it to make something better, right? To stand up when we need to make sure that we're educating people. I think it helped that there were so many parents and educators in our group, so that we were all kind of coming from a common place also. Anybody else want to? I didn't mean to cut anybody else off. I'm trying to look and see who I can call. I
just want to add about how important I think these photographs are. We were standing in Auschwitz and I was holding my camera or my phone and I looked at Marlene and I said, I feel really weird taking pictures. Like, why do I need to take pictures of these buildings? I could look at them online. I could look at them in a book. I'm not going to ask you to stand in front of a barrack and smile. Like, how do I take pictures? And Marlene said, I'm taking pictures of all of the participants while we're walking through. And that really hit me. That is why there's a picture of me and my husband walking through Jerusalem, because she was able to capture our experience in a way that I was trying to capture in my head, but I didn't know how to bring it home. So thank you for taking those pictures and having that conversation with me and really being able to capture our experience.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me hide behind my camera. And I think that was something too, because I had this conflict of the images and we talked about like, these are tourist destinations. And what does that mean? That death camp is a tourist destination, and then you're taking pictures of it, and then you're sharing the pictures of it. And there's a real ethical kind of dilemma there. And so I think that also when I made the cyanotypes, by like making them by hand, right, it kind of brought that layer back in that I didn't feel so removed.
Well, don't worry, I took your advice and I'm pretty sure I have some pictures of you also.
Okay. And here's some pictures of the actual exhibition I just took since it's up. So if you want to go in there. Working our way around the JEA. And then here's a picture. We decided also this year, I asked Jamie and Sunny if we could move the student exhibitions, which are normally next to the auditorium, because the Yom HaShoah program is in the large auditorium. I asked if we could move them into the hallway so they could be part of the larger exhibition. And I hope that we keep doing that, because I think I saw already a lot of the preschool parents and teachers stop and look at the artwork. And this is artwork made by high school students and middle school students. And I think that's really important too, to see that it's not just me, right? Professional photographer, professor, making images, and participants of the march who got this opportunity to go on this like once in a lifetime trip making photographs. But also like children are learning about it in school, and they're also making artwork about it. And I think it was really nice to have their work in the hallway too, in the gallery. And since there isn't a program in the auditorium, I think that helped push it over to the other side. I think that is all for me, but I'm sure that there are questions or comments. I think Sunny can control that.
If there are any questions, please feel free to unmute yourself or write them in the chat. Well, if there is nothing going on, thank you so much, Marlene and Shelley and Jamie and Orly and everybody else that took part in this meaningful presentation. I hope to see many of you tonight at our 6:30 Yom HaShoah commemoration. If you don't have a link to it, it'll be virtual. Please contact me and I'll make sure that you have it. Also, please join us next week using the same link at the same time, next Thursday, for Israeli Independence Day celebrations. We hope to see you tonight and next week. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Marlene.
Thank you.
Thank you.